Good morning, everyone. Talk about putting some pressure on me to start things off. So we are sort of in the morning, all energetic, I hope, and I got a great panel here with me who've travelled from far and kind of near, although it did involve a far trip first. We've got Oren, Tim, and we got Eamonn. And just, guys, starting with yourself, Eamonn, because you're kind of near. Tell us a little bit about what you do and what your company does.
Sure, yeah. No, I've just returned back to Dublin recently after 11 years away. I've been with the board of SportVEST for the last couple of years, investing in sport-focused companies, and spent a long time at ESPN prior to that, and multiple other startup ventures in between.
And Tim, tell us a bit about what you do.
So my name is Tim Hayden. I'm the managing director, one of the co-founders of Stadia Ventures. We are a venture firm that focuses strictly on sports and esports, and we're unique that we actually have an accelerator tied to this whole venture fund. There's a number of them out there, which are really good ones, but we're based out of the States, but we always look at companies near and far. And so we've started to become known for Americanizing a lot of these companies, wanting to come into the American market.
And lastly, Oren.
I don't want to take it low, but I started as a football referee up to the top leagues. So that's where my journey in sports started. And I'm from Colosseum Sport. In parallel to that, to keep it a little bit high, I spent 12 years at Tel Aviv University doing innovation, venture capital, and several things around it. So my passion in the last 2 years around Colosseum is to connect sports to startup technology and to help the I would say the tech community around Tel Aviv and international to scale into the sport arena to see the potential there.
And I'll never forget the first time I was in Israel. I was over for an RSA conference, and my first taxi, the driver here is, I'm from Ireland, and he goes to me, here's the difference between Ireland and Israel. In Israel, we have beach. In Ireland, you have sea, which I thought was the most cruel and accurate thing anyone's ever said to me. But I suppose one thing, because I've been covering sports tech for about 10, 15 years before I even used the term, and Sean and Stephen, who were on earlier, have covered their companies quite a bit. I saw a lot of darts being thrown at boards in the first few years of covering, and maybe more than the first few years. So starting with yourself, Oren, are we getting more strategic in how we actually invest in sports tech and how we define what sports tech even is?
So I think that seeing the interest coming from the venture capital by the Startup General Report, you can see the availability of funding per capita in the tech world, and Israel is one of the leading, of course, the US main states. My relation with the investments or the VC ecosystem is that they don't really know what sport is. And we were talking about it backstage, is that every time that we meet a potential or introduce a potential lead to investment, we have to say that what sport is and what is kind of beneath it. It's kind of the media, the fan engagement, and the athlete performance, and so on and so forth. So I think that we are in the really we are not even close to the peak of where sports tech is going to be at. Seeing that in the last 12 years, analyzing the growth of cybersecurity, you're coming from the cyber world, the fintech industry, the agri-tech, and so on. And this is why I choose to be in this area, beside the passion that is around sport. That's on one side. And then on the other side, we see more and more movement towards being companies by the teams. They don't define themselves by teams and clubs anymore, but more of companies. The way they measure their user, the ARPU of the user, whether the user worth $200 or $500, and then they can later on build different valuation for their companies, teams. So on my side, more and more growth on the side of sports tech companies, more and more growth of the side of interest of investment, but we need to educate them.
And like Tim, Oren touched on sort of the breadth, because when it comes to that sort of value of the user, what you're looking for out of, say, an analytics platform for, player performance versus one on fan engagement are two massively different end results. So when you're trying to make an investment decision, like how do you sort of process all that?
Sure. So I think a lot of it always comes back to the foundational elements of investing. It's what is the team? What's the pain? What's the solution? Are there people willing to pay for the pain to go away? Once you start to move off of those kind of things, in our case, we like to bring in a lot of experts. With the way we structure our programs, and especially around the accelerators, we'll have the top 10 finalists for the accelerator program fly to one location, and then we'll run it almost like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, but instead of having 4 dragons, this last one, which was our 9th one we just ran, we had 158 senior sports and esports leaders in the audience. So we actually allow them to tell us, well, what is truly resonating with them? What is good? What's bad? What have they seen before? Because at the end of the day, every business or every investor wants an exit, or some type of exit, whether IPO, or maybe it's an acquisition or something. So we want to bring in the audience that's going to be the end at the very end for us. We want to bring them in the beginning and help us to drive this forward.
And like Eamonn, you've worked in different aspects of sports. You've been with ESPN for about a dozen years. You've always been in the investment side now. So with that mix of knowledge, like what have you seen in terms of the evolution of sort of investment in sports tech?
Yeah, what's interesting to me is that, we do have this trend where, like, it was always external money, right? Like, it was family offices or big money from elsewhere investing from fintech and dabbling in sport as a niche. And now the industry is really starting to adopt a trend where it's driving the innovation, right? So the teams and players are investing. They have their own little venture arms for a lot of the leagues. Former players and now even current players, which has been really helpful, have become really savvy investors. I've been in San Francisco the last few years before coming back. And you have Golden State Warriors players that are known to be well, kind of vested in a lot of different opportunities. They're building VC funds. And what that does is that sets the tone for the entire industry. It used to be like, even if the owners or players were investing, they were too busy to get involved. So it was just blind capital is what I usually call it, right? So they throw money at a problem and they throw it at the founders and they hope the founders figure it out. But now you're seeing consultative and strategic investing. So you're saying, okay, well, we're going to invest in this because this fan engagement platform will help my stadium, my arena, and then we're going to also support that. We're going to give you that first client, or we're going to give you 4 former players as ambassadors or consultants to use their brand on social media, or to help advise you on how it should work on the pitch if it's a wearable technology or something. So I think that because the inside-out nature of the industry is changing, and the leagues and teams and players are becoming innovators, and as Oren was saying, they're driving it from a business perspective as opposed to just on the pitch. I think that is changing the culture, and then the outside money is more educated. There's more trust and respect, but we still need to move it from being a complete niche into a broader ecosystem.
Now, a little bit off topic, you are reminding me with the player investment part. There was a contract for a Brooklyn Nets player, Spencer Dinwiddie, I believe, where he's actually selling shares in his own contract. Is that right?
Yeah. So, I mean, look, and the blockchain sector is playing a part of this, which I've been around for the last few years as well. There's a lot of opportunity for people to play with different models. I think in the sporting ranks, there's different ways to think about intellectual property. I'm a big believer that intellectual property will be what leads us to stop saying sports market and really what we like to call it is the sports economy. And I think at the foundation, you can't forget that we're also, recruiting fund-to-funds and other people that have legacy investments. So it's going to take time for that market to mature. But when players do things like that and offer their own contract out for people to take a piece of their earnings in the long term, that engages the public as well. So there's nice B2C opportunities for investment there.
It reminds me of the Bowie bonds back in the 90s, which worked out great for Bowie, not for the investors. Looking though, you mentioned sort of, that evolution, Eamonn. I want to bring on to you, Tim, on this one about sort of going from sports marketing to sort of, sports investing essentially. Like, is there still too much of a niche factor with sports tech, and that's sort of a challenge for investing in it and that? Or is it sort of, you're using that as a way to make people realize, listen, you can start in sports and it'll get you into other areas? Sure.
So when you talk with a lot of the institutional investors, what they'll end up saying is, but we always come back to healthcare. We always come back to fintech, pure tech, and that's because what they know. In our case, when we created what we created, and the beauty is there's a lot of crazy people like us around the world. So when we come across each other, we try to hold on to each other very tightly. What we have now done, though, is we've been able to say, listen, your investments may be in healthcare and all the others, but your passion is still in sports, and there are opportunities within those sports segments. And what, in a way, we position as sports is really a Trojan horse for so many of our companies because they're platforms that can then jump off into the military, into construction, into healthcare. But it starts with sports. And Formula One was always a massive side of this, which, hey, you start with Formula One and eventually it makes it into our vehicles. That's the same thing we're trying to do and trying to educate with the sports fund side of it.
Because one of the things that sort of reminds me of is sort of investment in the sports sector is quite similar to investment in the space sector, in that sort of, the initial usage, you're kind of going, well, what's the broad use? But the point is, this can be actually brought down to further use from there.
Exactly. And for each of our companies within our portfolio, we'll even tell them, pro sports is not the money maker. It really is in the amateur and the high school and the youth sports. That's what's driving this all together. And then again, you're also then creating customers for life as you really, drive down into that youth market.
And like Oren, obviously you've been working in this sector a bit, although you are the young man on the stage. It's like
I didn't shave today.
he tried to make us all look a bit older for the rest of us. What have you seen sort of in that evolution period with sort of investment in sports? Are the investors realizing sort of the opportunity there, or are they still a bit? It's just a small piece of a bigger pie.
So to connect to what Tim just said, I think that the general opportunities in two main areas is to not only talk about sports tech direct companies, but also core technologies that are relevant to the sports industry. Because what's the difference in, when you analyze, so there is evolution in the last 10 years in terms of investment in technology. At the beginning, it was like 2007 and 8. You met an entrepreneur and you say, what are you, a web or mobile? And then later on, he developed, what are you, a big data? Are you in the fintech area and so on? And today, it's much more of a vertical. Are you travel tech? Are you sports tech? Are you construction technology or property? So in a way, the sports tech deserves to have its own way and is the venture capital around it, because there is a lot of money that is tapping into this world for many reasons, whether it's e-sport, whether the data that we collect in the last 10 years, we didn't know that the biggest fan base of Barca and Real Madrid is in Indonesia. Yeah, no one knew that 10 years ago. Now people know that. Why are you laughing? From Indonesia? No, I'm kidding. So
it was worth a guess.
I was close. But in general, I would say that the opportunity is with the core tech. That's the first thing, not only the sports tech. For example, Replay that was acquired by Intel. So I'm sure that Intel will have massive use of this volumetric technology in many other implementation. That's one thing. And on the other side, many of the entrepreneurs in the sports tech, let's say, that tap into the world of technology through sports tech as an implementation, and they are could be relevant for construction tech or travel tech, and they start with sports tech, they sometimes confuse and they focus on the leaders and not the followers, not on the mass market, and this is a no-go for many of them, because how many LeBron James you have? So it's basic, and they spend tons of time on that. That's one thing. And second thing, they develop things that are not, I would say, correlated with the market. Basic use that on the Champions League, you cannot have any wearable. So you develop things for leaders, for the top athletes that goes on wearables, and no one can use it tomorrow. That's basic that they're not exposed to. So two potentials, mass market and core technologies. This is what we're looking for. On our data, for example, we have a little bit more than 200 sports tech companies that are direct sports tech, and above 800 technologies that are relevant to the sports industry, but are coming from machine learning, material science, and many other areas.
It's one thing I want to ask you about, because in Ireland, obviously, we know about our own strong sports tech sector, and one of the great things about it is how spread it is around the island. It's not a very Dublin-centric sector. What's the sports tech industry like in Israel?
So in total, Israel, today there are 8,400 startup companies in Israel, so a population of 9.2 million. Today we have elections for the second time in the same year. I hope we're going to end with that, because it's stuck in our economy. But so it's kind of active and vivid ecosystem. Most of it is concentrated. I hope that there aren't any municipalities that will hear me, but everything happens more or less around Tel Aviv, and some of the health development goes to Jerusalem. For example, Mobileye, that was one of the biggest acquisition by Intel a year and a half ago, which is $15 billion, is based in Jerusalem. But most of it happened in Tel Aviv, and also the sports activities, most of it is based, you've been to Maccabi Tel Aviv.
I've been to a Maccabi game, yeah.
Let's face the truth, Israel is not a leader in sport, and the ability to be kind of connected to the worldwide leadership in sport is to come from the technology point of view. Same process that happened with the automotive industry. We were never leaders in the automotive industry. The best thing we did is produce a car in the 1970s, and that the true story is that the camels ate the car in the desert. It's a true story, you can check it. and then Israel, 30 years later on, became one of the worldwide leaders in auto with Waze, with Move It, for example, a classic, core technology that taps into the sports technology. So Move It just closed with Marseille last week, with AC Milan, pure transportation solution for mass market event and core technology.
And one thing you mentioned there, when we think about a question I'll ask Eamonn, because you mentioned there's only so many LeBron Jameses out there, but I know of a documentary that you remember well from your ESPN time, Broke, about sort of athlete investments, shall we say, have a questionable history. by which I mean there's a lot of restaurants and a lot of bars that didn't do well. We're starting to see more athletes invest in tech, like you mentioned Steph, we've mentioned Clay from the Warriors. We're starting to see also over here more European-based athletes doing it as well, obviously a lot of Irish rugby players. Is there sort of this branding thing which helps a lot of the sports tech businesses that they can get it associated with a name, not necessarily a superstar globally, but in their own market that can bring in other investors into the party?
Well, this is a key thing, like he was saying earlier, like you can't all chase the top athlete or the top teams, right? So I think, you see very smart individuals that played maybe 3, 4, 5 years, weren't a superstar. I mean, those type of people are starting some of these businesses as well. So it's not just about the athletes that are investing, because that's still a small portion of the athlete population, right, that are investing. But of course, when they add their brand and they say, I'm going to invest in this, then they have the oomph of their network, their experience. It's really comes back to credibility, right? It does the founder. It's all about team, as Tim was saying earlier. Like, timing and luck, as said on the last panel as well, is a big factor. But, it's about the team, right? And if you can surround yourself with a great advisor or an advisory board that has the experience in the arena that you're targeting, or if you can get somebody to invest, a former athlete or current athlete to invest, I mean, all of those things give you a leg up, especially if they're in that vertical. But let's not forget that teams have supply chains, right? They're building and financing stadiums. They're running day-to-day businesses, right? And I always like to say in sport and media, like there's a media supply chain, there's a sports supply chain to every arena, to every piece of marketing that goes out to get somebody to come to an event. The Sacramento Kings have built a massive technology facility in their arena. They run accelerators and all these kinds of things. So sport tech is really growing kind of in and out of the industry. And I think the opportunities there to involve the athletes and have the brand, as long as they understand the product and are vouching for it in a natural way, it can only add to the startup. But they shouldn't necessarily just chase the top names, because sometimes somebody that has some great experience in the industry that they'll be a little more hands-on is better for the company's success in the long term.
There are at least 10 companies in Israel that raised money from Djokovic. At least I'm counting it. Everyone's like, Djokovic is our first investor.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jamie Heaslip's the guy for that over here.
Yeah.
And one thing you mentioned, Tim, about sort of the money's in sort of not the pro, it's in sort of all the levels down. Because I know talking to Sean, who was on the previous stage, that's one of the things he's sort of noticed. He knew obviously there's a lot of these clubs and various sports and teams, but even he was kind of going like the sheer number that he could sell to was sort of even a little surprising to him. And one thing I've noticed though as well is recently a lot of pro teams are starting to realize that they can get involved investing in these businesses. I know in Kaunas in Lithuania, Zalgiris are investing in a hackathon to try and promote a lot of these businesses. Is that one thing you're noticing more, is like more realization that like once you get below the brand names, that's where the real value is?
Very true. I mean, at the end of the day, you also have to remember the vast majority of team owners did not inherit a team. They actually did something to make their money, and it wasn't in sports, most likely. So in many cases, you're starting to see them apply their business sense to the outside, to the investment world. And with that, then ends up becoming, because I love how you mentioned that, is what you're starting to really see is, one, they are now taking their own brand and their own name under the control to be able to put it out there. But two, so the Sacramento Kings are a perfect example where they know that they're going up against the Golden State Warriors. For those not from the States, they are literally next door neighbors. And so they're always going to be fighting for Silicon Valley, like who is the best. And so in this case, this was the opportunity for the Kings to actually take one step ahead. But what they're also realizing is, in the States, there's a group called Stack Sports, used to be known as Blue Star. It is a $750 million roll-up fund for just used sports properties. So all they're doing is acquiring sports properties at just a crazy pace. They did 22 in 2017, I think 18 last year, and they're slated to do another 20 this year. But their entire concept is they are gobbling up because that is the next generation fan. That is the next generation athlete. And so if you can control them now, what you're doing is creating this ecosystem, but you're infusing this ecosystem from day one, with the understanding that this is a little bit of a long-term play. NBC Sports ended up buying Sports Engine for an astronomical amount of money, and that was because NBC knew that they had the rights to the Olympics. I believe at that time it was 4 or 6 next Olympics. If you're going to have it for the next 4 or 6 Olympics, you better start indoctrinating these kids, because they will be the adults that will be paying for everything later on.
And just thinking there along the lines of sort of, that's the Olympics, that's one type of sports investment. Are we starting to see money flow into sort of esports and that side of things, like, or?
I know this is a whole nother panel. This is where I really peak up. Again, this is more a global phenomenon, but it's really being felt in the U.S. In 2017, the amount of money spent on traditional sports, ticket sales, concessions, merchandising, sponsorship, buying a ball and glove or a football, soccer ball in our neck of the woods, was surpassed by esports. So all of that combined was surpassed by esports and video games. And that is not a trend that's going to change. So what you're seeing is this massive transition. You're seeing a lot of traditional sports executives now moving over into the esports realm. And they're bringing with them all their talent and experience and the know-how of generating sponsorship and everything. So I think you are going to continue to see this dominance of esports. And again, you know, the average age of a gamer is 35 years old, which is higher than most people ever would have thought, because it's 12 and 14-year-olds. 15-year-old just won the League of Legends championship, I forgot what it was, for like $15 million. It was like something crazy. But you're really seeing this change, the sea of change. So a lot of the traditional companies that we're investing in, again, getting back to the platforms, are able to move over into that esports realm and take advantage of that opportunity.
And is that one of the things you're seeing from the VCs you work with, that sort of, you know, they can adapt from sports into other areas like esports? Like Oren?
Asking me, I'm looking at him. So esport is not that popular in Israel, I would say, in terms of technology solutions. So we don't see many investment around esports yet. In terms of numbers, so it's also referring to the fantasy world. You know? So both two in the basket are becoming more and more popular, but they're not close to yet to the classic solutions for the media and the athlete development world. So we are not yet there, I must say. It's developing, it takes time. The idea is that he was talking about the transition, you know, that the leaders are doing, that the experienced people are doing. It takes a little bit of time. So to measure it in time frame, in 2 years from now, in 3 years from now, we're going to have, you know, there are not going to be SportsTech events. There are going to be esports event and fan engagement events, like the TTO events. It's going to get its own, it's just the beginning of the industry, especially focusing on esports, because it gets a lot of traction and the growth is massive. It just crossed the $1 billion industry last year, and 2 years ago it was 700 million. So, you know, nominal numbers, it's not huge, but the growth is amazing.
And Eamonn, is there anything you see sort of an investment opportunity there when it comes to sort of the tech side of it?
Well, I mean, look, the teams and leagues in America are investing. They now have their own esports teams for a lot of the leagues, and full leagues now. But, you know, you have this kind of misnomer in the industry that, like, it's FIFA and Madden, right? It's sports games, where it's not, right? And now that all the players are playing these games as they grow up, not that we're targeting the youth too much, right? But as the players grow up and they're playing these games, naturally, that the vehicle of social media has involved kind of a great opportunity for the esports arena to grow rapidly. Now, the biggest problem with esports at the beginning was there was no structure, right? So there were no agents, there were no legal structures for any of the industry. So as that is slowly starting to get a little bit better, then the bigger sponsors, then more money flows in, then the VCs take more risks. But it's really hard to kind of take a risk when you can see the ecosystem falling apart in certain pockets. So as that improves, and it is, as you see, there's big esports arenas being built and all kinds of things happening, because even the viewership, the same numbers are there, right? Even the NBA Finals in America, all of the top Super Bowl viewing, I think it's the only thing that's still surpassing the esports at the moment. So the audience is there as well, in addition to the tech.
Now, I know the audience here also came here looking for unicorns. So rather than picking a company, that's far too mean. Looking at sort of what it's going to require for a unicorn to develop in sports tech, starting with yourself, Eamonn, where do you see it coming from, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a bad answer for me, but it comes down to intellectual property for me, right? So somebody that's going to have garnered something that has scale to it, as Oren's saying, not something that's directly for one little tiny fan engagement idea here or there. It's going to have to be something that kind of transforms the industry in some way, and I think it will be around an intellectual property idea. There's so much unused monetary benefit potentially out of the brand of a league, a team, all the way down to the player. I think there'll be a couple ideas in tech that really take sport to the next level in the tech industry, and I think it'll be an idea around using the brand rights of a big organization, and it'll probably come through maybe a venture arm of one of the leagues to funnel it.
And Tim, where do you see it coming from?
So I'm gonna completely agree with you, and I'll take it one step further because I really believe in what we continue to see in sports is as much as we don't want to call it a niche, it's still a niche, and each of our companies that we invest in are platforms that'll move you out into healthcare, so on and so forth. So I could also see the unicorn coming out of the sports space to also have massive implications across other industries, and it may end up getting its start in sports and things like that. The other one that I always keep kind of coming back to is as the companies continue to mature, the leagues are also maturing. The teams are also maturing. They're figuring out what they really need. So in a way, I see it also not necessarily coming out of just the private sector. I see it coming out of the leagues and out of the teams. But I will also give complete credit. I believe it'll also come out of Israel. I truly believe the technology that's coming out of Israel is amazing, that is being applied then into the sports sector. Out of our portfolio of 36 companies, we have 2 of them in our portfolio from Israel, and they all came out of military. So again, I see it kind of bouncing back and forth. I think that's where the unicorn will come from.
So Aaron, Tel Aviv.
I have to
become a
disagree.
unicorn?
No. In general, I think that we see, analyzing where good deal flow exists beside the US. So it's Finland, it's Sweden, it's the UK, Ireland, of course, and we see good stuff coming from Tel Aviv. But in general, I think that the biggest challenge I'm facing now, because technology exists, is the awareness, and awareness on both sides. Luckily, we have only 50% of the challenge because the sports market is not in Israel. So it's very hard for me to educate what exists outside of Israel, but we are doing that. But is to educate the financial market, the investors, top down, bottom up, to invest and to be open to hear about sports tech or sport-related technologies, as we like to define it. And one of my partners is 78 years old, senior in the VC industry. He says, "What's sports? Like, if you say sports, say in a one-shot, sport, wellness, health, extend it, because people say it's a niche and we want it to be bigger." But so the challenge is awareness around the tech guys to tap into the sports industry, and I see it happening. I see the growth is a massive growth. It's not yet thousands of companies, but 2 years ago, we were talking about 103 companies. Today, we are more than 200. Core tech is where I see the real potential. And hopefully next year, we'll see even more tapping into this world.
Well, people forget, like, fund of funds, right? Every fund has to raise their money as well, just like every startup. So, they have to convince the next level of family offices that this is a proper market and not just a niche, and that takes time.
Absolutely.
Thinking of the awareness side, because looking at sort of investing in sports tech and so sustainability, because an area sports tech obviously would naturally flow into. So starting with yourself, Tim, what role do you think sports tech can really play in sort of creating a more sustainable society?
So it's actually a really good question.
Good one.
What we've seen in some of the companies that we've invested in is, well, first of all, you start at the millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, so on and so forth. It does become more of an impact, more of social awareness type of startups and things like that. We have one company called Nix out of Boston that developed a biosensor that measures your sweat in real time and will tell you before you bonk that you're about ready to bonk, and allows you to be able to figure this stuff out. What they've actually found is that the military and construction are better clients of this, and it's really because, again, around the social side of things, not social impact side, but more around society is, you're gonna have more soldiers in warm weather climates, you're gonna have construction workers in warm weather climates, and so it's, what we're starting to see is the technologies that we're looking at are driving more towards this community involvement or social impact, but not necessarily on the true social side of things. That's kind of where we're seeing.
And Aaron, your thoughts on that, on the sustainability aspect?
So, the first talk, the keynote, to talk about inclusion and so on. So sport is a tool. I work a lot with the Paris Center for Peace and Innovation. And one of the major areas they invest in is in connecting people, Israelis, Palestinians, to work together through sport. So we find sport as an amazing, amazing tool for us to unite people. On the social side, we are tapping into this world mainly from the inclusion side. How we create more communities that kind of talk to the other using the sport as a channel. Of course, that some of the solutions we were talking about, finally, sports tech. So some of the solutions are based on many people talk to me and said, you have 6 main verticals around sport, yeah? And in addition to those six main verticals, why don't you add like the edutech around sport, that like similar to Intelligem, one of your portfolio companies. So is to share more around the sport, not the sports tech, but the sport, education that will be open to all. So I see a lot in terms of one of the development beside the six main verticals in sport that maybe you guys are familiar with, fan engagement, broadcast, and so on, is the sports, the edutech around sport. It's one very vertical that's kind of growing. I can say that, in Colosseum, we were lucky to have FC Barcelona as the design partner and to see their needs as one of the leading clubs in the world. So you see that how the clubs actually differentiate between their department, media, education, sport methodology. And in every area there, we see kind of core tech and sports tech solution. And the social part takes a lot of it in terms of the inclusion and how you find solutions to, because finally it's the mass market. So whether you give, you always get back. So the idea is to use technology to give, to share education in order to get back to build your monetization system.
And Eamonn, lastly, your own thoughts on sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's B Corp structures that are growing across the world. They're bigger in America than others, but it's basically a for-profit company that has a nonprofit twinge to it. You have to do good for society to keep the accreditation, but you're a for-profit company. I mean, there's a lot of things around the sporting ecosystem that gives you that vehicle, right? So you have access to a mass market through the sport. And so I think when you're looking at sustainability, whether it's energy or any other type of industry, they're also all sponsoring sport, right? That's the beauty of sport and media is they get all the sponsors from every industry. So even if there's not direct involvement early, they're a great mouthpiece and vehicle as well. And so, but they're all building arenas and stadiums that are all driving energy solutions and these kinds of things. So there's a lot of opportunity for sport to be driving the sustainability market for the SDGs and other things over time by impacting local communities because they're such a big part of the local communities.
I got time for one more question for each of you, and it's the same one for all of you. So I'm a VC, I've got some money, or I'm just an investor in general.
Show me the money now.
It's hypothetical, Aaron. But it's like, I'm thinking of investing in sports tech. What are the questions I should be asking myself? I'll start with yourself, Aaron, given you think I've got cash.
A good company?
What should I be asking myself if I'm investing in sports tech? Before
Okay, so two major questions, as I said before, it was like, which market are you referring to? Is it like the leaders or the followers, if I may call it? That's the first thing, and then to see the growth with using this technology to other sectors. Because if you're going to limit yourself to swimming pools that will analyze when do you touch the wall and you come back, turn around, so it's not going to work.
And Tim, what should I be asking myself when I'm spending this money I clearly don't have?
That's good. I would say it comes back to the foundational elements, about the founding team, about the pain, about the solution, all that stuff. I'd also end up saying about what's the market size of this thing? Because at the end of the day, and we've seen a lot of tremendous startups. I've had 7 myself, and I now realize the size of the market is a differentiator on whether people will invest or not. If it is a smaller market, it may be tough to get my money back. But more importantly is what is it doing also for the community and the overall, like what is the longer term vision of this whole thing?
And lastly, Eamonn, so I don't lose my shirt, what should I be thinking before I spend this cash?
Well, look, I'll just take the first part of what he was saying there. It's the human capital. Is it the right founding team? Can they survive the bumps and the peaks and the valleys of a startup environment? Do they have enough market experience, or will they surround themselves with the right people? To me, it comes down to human capital almost always. Will those people execute the vision, and can they adjust to the needs of their constituents or the market as their company evolves, and can they scale it to reach that mass market?
Well, that wraps up our session here. I'd like to thank Eamonn, Tim, and Aaron for joining us. Please give them a warm round of applause.
Thank you.